Good afternoon, everyone. Glad that you could join us. We're going to get started today. We want to talk a little bit about audiology care delivery channels. Obviously, we have been in a time in our life where we have really had to start thinking about how to deal with that. I'd like to introduce Dr. Susan Good. Many of you in the state of Florida, I'm sure, know her. And so she is in a consultant position and, of course, a very, very good friend who I love to bounce things off of. So just a little bit about me, if you don't know who I am. I've been practicing in the state of Florida my entire career, which is more than 35 years. That's really all I'm going to say. And I have been with the current practice that I'm with as Director of Audiology and Rehab Services for a number of years. So, and of course, Susan, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. Patty and I are excited to share kind of what we've been learning over the last 8 weeks or so as we've kind of worked our way through revamping a number of things in her practice and the way care is being delivered. I'm an audiologist. I've been practicing since '95. And the last 15 years or so, I've really been more on the industry side. My last role, I was a COO of one of our large manufacturer-owned retail groups, and we had almost 330 clinics or so, ENT, audiology, and dispensing across country. So a lot of experience with a lot of different ways to do things. And even with all of Patty's experience and mine smashed together, the last 8 weeks or couple months has really been kind of a new journey for us, with not really having a roadmap or a checklist that we can refer to in order to know how to move forward. A couple just housekeeping things. We have been told that at exactly 60 minutes, we get cut off. So we want to make sure that we have the opportunity to answer your questions. So if you have Q&A, or if you have questions, throw them in the Q&A box. I'll watch for them. If they look like they might be short and something Patty might be able to answer quickly, we'll interrupt her and get that rolling. If not, if you can change your name from guest to your actual name, if for some reason she misses your question, she will reach out afterwards and be able to just individually have a conversation with you. At the end of the slide deck, we have my email on there, which is susan@openoceangroup.com. Our ebook is delayed with our designer, and I think it will be out on, I'm hoping, Monday, that will have all this content and a little bit more even in it. So if you want that, you can just email me individually. We'll also get a few things over to Florida Academy and to Rachel, so you guys have access to that item also. Real quick, I was going to throw out a poll just to kind of see how things are going for everybody. Wondering if people have been adding virtual visit capabilities or any type of new care delivery channel other than what is face-to-face. Right now, everybody's been pretty comfortable in that face-to-face environment. So if you guys don't mind just giving us a heads up so we can kind of get a feel for, where everybody is in the audience as Patty's sharing, and to help her with some of her detail. Just to give you, there's a lot of things we could talk about with all of the things that have been going on. In this next, 55 minutes, we're really going to try to focus on the care delivery channels. We're going to focus on some of the operations and revenue model that Patty's been seeing kind of evolving. Some of this, obviously, we don't have all the answers to, but we absolutely can share where she started and how things are going through the past couple months. She's going to talk very candidly, I believe, about the challenges and some of the insights that she has learned, and really identifying a number of opportunities for us as a profession, no matter where you're practicing, whether it's an ENT audiology business, whether it is a private audiology practice, whether you're doing a lot of diagnostics or dispensing, whether you're seeing peds, or adults. And so there really is a lot of opportunity across the board in different ways to take care of patients that is coming about. So just to give everybody a heads up regards to where we are, what we're hoping to cover today. And as Patty, I think, kind of opened and said, we've been adjusting our face-to-face delivery over the past 8 or 10 weeks, maybe not even voluntarily, something that we wanted to add to our business, but we really have had the challenge to say, okay, one day you walk into the office and things seem fairly normal, and the next day a number of people weren't allowed to open, depending on where you were in the country. And so how do you adjust and know that on the other side, when you get out of this, that you're going to be able to manage not only the short term, but mid and long term in the business, and really change the way that we're delivering things and compete. So to make sure we're all on the same page, because there's so many new words out there, I'm sure we'll have a number more abbreviations for audiology as we love to. But face-to-face is really kind of that in-office delivery channel that most of us have been comfortable with and been doing for a very long time. We've had to add the word contactless into our vocabulary and to really think about how we can deliver care without touching the patient, and virtual care in general. I think Suzanne was talking about teleaudiology or telemedicine over the past. I'm sure you've heard a number of things about some of the virtual care options, and video and audio appointments, true phone consults, and e-visits even, which are the more asynchronous approach, which Patty will spend quite a bit of time on. But it's just really how the patient gets to the provider are the things that we're going to be spending some time on. And I think, Patty, you have had an experience. You probably could make a checklist of 100 things or more that are new every time you're creating a new delivery channel. But I think these were the big four that you thought really had the biggest impact over the biggest challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you start looking at the changing the way you deliver service, there are a lot of things that you have to consider that I think we kind of take for granted. So how are you going to expand your communication to your patient? How are you going to get in touch with them in this format? How are we going to coordinate multi-level providers, whether it be audiology assistant and an audiologist, whether it be the audiologist and the physician, if you're in a dual type practice like that? We had to look at marketing strategies. You know, in audiology, we think about marketing in a variety of ways, database marketing. But in this case, we weren't really wanting to do anything but market the availability of service. That's really what we were looking to do, and determining how we were going to do that and it not feel salesy, not feel like what patients are used to in that arena. And then we really had to look at how we were going to adjust our safety protocols. I think that there's still, we're adjusting those every day, whether you are in practice or not. Every human is adjusting what we're doing every day, because information keeps evolving. And so we have to keep changing what we're doing. And so that was extremely important to be able to adjust those protocols. If you look at where we were before COVID, we were far from mainstream. Telemedicine and remote programming had been a key goal of mine for a long time. Manufacturers, as we know, have been talking about it for a while, but it never really came into fruition into our practice for a variety of reasons. Not because I've not thought that it was extremely valuable. It was just, we were seeing patients face to face as fast as we could go, taking care of our patients. So it wasn't something that we were really forced to look at ways to provide care. And I think if you look at the recent survey of the 360 health individuals across multiple specialties, you can see that, you know, the vast majority of those people surveyed really didn't have any telehealth technology in place prior to COVID-19. And so if you look at what the healthcare industry has been forced to do, and regulatory bodies have been having to deal with, is trying to turn to alternative ways of providing patient care while you're protecting your provider and your patient. And I think, you know, when you really look at what we've been doing and how effective it's been in this format, it just leads to the statement that you see next about how the global telemedicine market is expected to grow. If you look at those numbers from 2018, 28 million up to 57 million by the end of 2025. So I think telemedicine is here to stay.
For sure. I mean, yeah. And I don't think, you know, I think what we all don't know is, you know, what is to come or what will go back to, you know, no longer being an acceptable, you know, way to communicate out, you know, the way that they've had to change some of the compliance and regulation. But, you know, we can share what we know today. And I think the biggest opportunity there is to give patients a new way into the provider. So we've kind of separated our talk here into kind of what really was the big focus during the height, and then how things are looking as Patty is getting back into business in South Florida and really going from maybe a 10 or 20% patient load in-house to really managing a larger patient load, getting back a little bit more to normal, in addition to now wanting to serve a number of other patients through another delivery channel, and a lot of the things that she learned in that process. And I think, Patty, what was interesting, and it's what you said, we all have the intention of doing things, and but face-to-face was really busy, and you were you have so many things going on. You're doing a number of things kind of informally, where yes, we're trying to do some remote programming, and yes, we're reaching out to patients maybe, on a phone, but they weren't really defined, and we weren't really driving the value proposition through to the patient and kind of really capturing that and doing it with intent. When you already had a lot of busy offices, you have different waiting times in different offices, you have productivity that's varying, and you're managing that. And I think that really was just kind of status normal. And we all say when we get a few more hours in the day, we'll be able to add some of those different items. But what we thought, one of the things Patty and I think is kind of most interesting, is the way that most patients were being seen and how kind of the channel to provider existed. And it's kind of a really traditional model, right? Patients calling or leaving a message, and audiology assistants or audiologists listening to them, or the receptionists, and then somebody calling the patient back. And if it's not to schedule an in-office appointment, it was often to do a complete, what maybe today we would consider a virtual phone consult, something that has a lot more definition. And they were spending all that time with patients without really driving the intent and the value into that interaction, doing a great job, but just not really kind of on the books or on anybody's radar.
Well, and I think the other thing that I would like to say right now, a lot of people, our practice is very large. We have a very large practice. People believe that means that I have a huge amount of resources, which that is not true, just so you know. But what that has done is I have offices in varying areas across the state. And if you've looked at what COVID has done, I've had to look at each location, because some locations weren't being impacted at all. Patients were still very comfortable coming in face-to-face, where other patients were absolutely fearful to go out their door. But yet, I think that's an important thing to keep in mind, is that, regardless of what kind of practice you have and what your practice characteristics have been pre-COVID, there's a lot of things that you can incorporate as you start looking at the lessons that we've learned during this time. I think the difficult part, as Susan mentioned, is one day we're working, everything's fine, and the next day nobody can go to work. And I think that's where, in the healthcare environment, especially, and I think this is something that our professional organizations have struggled with a lot. Who's essential? Who's not? Should we be working? Should we not? Are we putting the patients at risk, or are we not? And I chose to ride in the middle of the fact that I believe hearing healthcare is vitally important, especially in the time of a pandemic where people are socially isolated already. We're having to watch television. We're having to do all those things. So I had to come up with something to be able to have services available for these patients, even if they couldn't come in the office. And so that's where we really started looking at what could we do? Our workforce has been reduced by a number of hours if we still have offices open. We've got patients and providers that are very fearful to come into the office. Now we've got very limited capacity because our hours have been reduced. And we don't really even have the ability as colleagues to collaborate as a group and come up with a plan that works well. And so it was really adopting at a very fast track what we were going to do to get from face-to-face appointments, which had been our norm, into this alternative care channel. And so I think that is something to really think about, because this is the time where, with medicine, if you are working in an environment with physicians, you know that the big talk in the pandemic in the medical world has been e-visits and telemedicine and things that had been on the roadmap for insurance companies, but yet they hadn't figured out how to do it with the HIPAA regulations and things. And this pandemic really shoved everything forward, and, releasing of HIPAA requirements and to give patients access to care. Because again, nobody knows how long this was going to last, what the impact will be, and those sort of things. So how are we going to deliver that information to patients and that care to patients, regardless of the fact that audiology is not getting reimbursed for it?
Right. And I mean, so I think the first thing that you did is you sat down and said, okay, we have face-to-face. We informally do some remote programming. So that's a channel. We definitely have people drop things off and pick things up at the front desk. We might need to formalize that. So we have a process in place, particularly around safety, and that type of planning. And then, as you kind of created those channels, not even knowing if you were going to be able to execute, right? Then you had to dive in, right? And go, okay, if we have an e-visit or a telemedicine or teleaudiology, where we have video and audio, what do we need to think about next? And the big thing was, after you got that initial list, was that you started to classify your patients into segments, and that age, diagnosis, rehab, are they in a rehabilitative environment, kind of chronic care, place in the practice, or is it something that, is much more active, like somebody that just was diagnosed with BPV, right? I mean, so you really had kind of that like big whiteboard going of like, all right, who even falls into a category where a phone consult or a video consult would be useful, right? Absolutely. And then driving all those other things that you see under capacity, which I think was, even more interesting.
Well, I think the biggest thing too is you consider, the capacity and of knowledge, right? We all know audiology, we all know programming. Did we all know remote programming for every manufacturer? I can tell you the answer to that in our practice was no. So there was a lot of things that I had to do quickly to provide information to staff members and things of that sort, making sure that they had training classes, making sure that we had the equipment that they needed, webcams and things of that sort. And I think that as you think through that process, so we evaluated where we were, and then we started developing processes in which to be able to deliver those services. And I think that's extremely important to realize that that's an ongoing process. So once I developed things and we started to implement, of course, we had to build on that because we had never done it before, and we would find things that would work better. It's not a one-size-fits-all solution for patients when you're seeing them face to face, much less when you are dealing with the fact that you can't be in that environment, and you have the challenges of certain individuals. They don't have technology that you can do virtual types of visits with, or if they have them, they don't know how to use them, and things of that sort. Also looking at, no guideline, no roadmap, no best practice. How are we going to try to really deliver quality care in an area that we had never been in? And then once we have developed that, how are we going to keep it ongoing? Again, whether it's ongoing, at a virtual format because patients still are not able to come in or don't care to come in, or how are we going to transition them back into the office? I will tell you that, as we dive a little deeper, where my thoughts land with that now.
Yeah, and I think what the hardest thing is that the strategic need doesn't outweigh the human factor, right? I mean, even when doing a whatever visit would have been handier, sometimes it's just not possible, right? And that's, I think, kind of where some of your contactless, like curbside, came out of, right? Where you need somebody, you want to be able to do remote programming, but they can't do it maybe physically from afar, but they don't want to come all the way into the office. So you kind of found a way in the middle. Your new normal, and for patients, I think is interesting because you've really kind of put some structure around not just your face-to-face visits that still, of course, will continue, but, hey, if a patient calls and they're having an issue and they need a callback or something's going on, and it's instead of doing a true kind of informal call at 5:45 or 6:30 at night, trying to get through all of these patients, they can call and get scheduled to get put on an actual physical schedule for a provider. And we have different choices and different ways that patients can come in that may be more convenient for them, which I think has been really interesting, because we've had a good way to bring patients into the practice in a way that might be better for them than it has been in the past. And I just am being cautious of time, Patty, just to keep an eye. 2:50 is where we're at.
I keep looking for like a clock, but I don't see it.
So I don't want to lose the meat of your talk. But I know the big thing, and you talked a little bit about we want to do things. We've identified what it is. We've kind of looked at some of the challenges that you might have. You've identified what patients might fit into different segments, but you're still in the creation. And what is everybody I know recognizes is, if we had a timeline at the bottom, it might be 3 days that all of this has happened. This isn't happening over months and months of strategic planning and good work. This is kind of like fast and furious, trying to be thoughtful, but cautious at the same time, which I think is very difficult. But I mean, your big ones were really, I think, finding a partner for e-visit and telemed, because even though you have a portal, because you're part of an ENT practice, the audiology part of your practice is not in that secure, HIPAA secure environment where patients can come in and create a virtual visit. Absolutely. So that was a challenge. And then, as you mentioned, remote programming, and hearing aid NCI. You guys have a lot of knowledge, but everything wasn't in one package to be able to identify and pass out.
Exactly.
You created a whole new thing.
Exactly. And that's where, sorry, this is real fun when you don't know when the other one's talking. Sorry to keep cutting you off. The other thing, I think that was one of the surprises for us, I think, and is curbside. In thinking about what was going on in the community, a lot of practices were closing. A lot of private practice audiologists were closing. A lot of medical practices were closed. And all I could think about at that point is, how do I get the information out that if a person is really, whether they are our patient or not, if they are really struggling and need help, how can they find us? So that's where Facebook kind of took on a new kind of spark for me. I enjoy Facebook, but I never quite really have adapted and adopted everything in it. But I can talk to you a little bit about that experience. It was very, 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 very positive. And then, of course, looking at general patient communication types, whether, how are we going to see each other? FaceTime, Skype, Zoom, because everything had been relaxed from HIPAA, we were allowed to do that.
Yeah. I mean, you're still in the creation right now, as I know that you're doing it now, but in this presentation, you're still going, okay, we've got our partners, we've got a plan. How do we book it?
Exactly. Right? And that meant that I had to educate the staff that was answering the phone on a variety of things, so that they got it onto the schedule, so that the providers knew where to be. Were they going to be providing care on the phone? Were they going to be doing an e-visit? Were they going to be doing a telemedicine type visit? Or were they going to be putting on their skates and going curbside? So that was all extremely important, because if I just used the hearing aid follow-up, that for us had always meant face-to-face. I think the thing too, where Susan was talking about finding a way to deliver care, patient-initiated e-visits, again, is something that was the first time that I had really heard prevalent in our practice, was with COVID. And my thoughts at that point was, really, if I'm going to establish something within the audiology realm, I want it to be set up in a medical format, so that, because I truly believe that there is a time coming where audiology will be able to provide more services and bill for them remotely. So didn't want to have to create something and then retrain everybody everybody once it started to come into the billable arena. So looking at e-visits and how those work with physicians was extremely beneficial. And that's where I really found my partner, my QM2 partner, with his S-Engage application. And that's really what started to allow us to expand our reach to patients. Of course, we had remote programming services, again, very slightly unavailable. We had to develop those. And then, of course, we had to develop our new curbside service.
So you're going to deep dive into e-visit for a second.
Well, I'm going to actually let you talk about e-visit, and I'll tell you why. I have to constantly say, okay, let's go back to this again, because it's not something that, as audiology, we think in that arena. I'm much better now, but it took a while.
Yeah, I mean, I think e-visit's interesting. It's an asynchronous interaction. So it's where if you're a patient, you can go into a patient portal, you can click a button, and you basically can send HIPAA secure content about yourself, something that's going on, directly to your provider. The provider can review it. If you're an MD or certain other professions, people are getting paid to do those chart reviews. And if there's medical recommendations, they can bill for that time. And then there's usually, for a certain percentage of them, some type of follow-up. It could drive to a telemedicine visit or to an in-office visit, or the physician could just refill a prescription, for somebody that's kind of in progress, if we think about it. Using the same type of strategy, even though we're not looking at the payer side, I mean, has been really productive for your practice, and not just from a patient care standpoint, but also from a revenue standpoint. And we had a lot of quick learning to do in regards to how are we going to try to take this and apply it to an audiology business. And one of the things was kind of being able to make sure that when we were sending, we have to tell the patients that it's available. We have to communicate it out. They're going to get a link that when they click on it, they can initiate a visit. We've set up different types of interviews, and we'll kind of, I think on the next slide, we share kind of how she dove in. But we also had to be kind of thoughtful in how do we know if we get 100 people that respond, and we have by, insurance standards or by CMS standards, it's, you have 7 days to respond, and obviously nobody wants to respond in 7 days to a patient that's actually initiating a visit. So Patty kind of put some things around hey, how are we going to figure out if it's urgent? How are we going to figure out if this is kind of care is needed? Is this somebody that is a constant? We were talking about things that might be more of this chronic issue. You have those hearing aid patients that come in every month because they have so much wax in their ears that they, it stops their technology, or the repetitive BPV patient that you're kind of keeping an eye on, particularly during allergy season. And then kind of how are we going to take this type of a format, this e-visit engagement, and develop a long-term strategy for the practice. So we're really putting ourselves in front of and taking care of patients that we have a relationship with. And we struggled a little bit with hey, we have these services available versus the way you kind of communicate with database marketing, where maybe you don't even have really a tight relationship with the patient, but you're kind of talking to them about some of the same things. And it became really, really clear as we dove in a little bit and really kind of created these segments. Patty started with a jump start kind of a thing, and neither one of us work with Jamie. We just, who owns QM2, we've just known him for probably 15 years or so. And so it was happenstance that we had the opportunity to work with a company that we know the owner so well that we could ask a lot of, I don't know that they were, there's no dumb questions, but there were probably a few dumb questions when we started, because we were really wanting to take something that didn't quite fit and really make it fit audiology. And so they helped us identify what patients we should talk to. And it was really came down to what patients do you feel that you have the best relationships with, that you really should be, that when you reach out to them, that they feel like they're being taken care of and not marketed to. Which ones do we want to know how they're doing, because we could do something to improve it if something was going on or active. An example of that was one of the interviews that Patty sent out was to her patients that had been treated for BPV in maybe the last 90 days. And it was like, hey, let's check in with them via e-visit and see how they're doing and see if they need our help. And if they do, they click on the link, HIPAA secure environment. They can answer a couple questions that Patty's teed up, provide a typed or texted or emailed kind of rhetoric back in, and the provider could look at that and help manage the situation if there's something that's actively going on that they feel like they need their provider for. And it was a little challenging at first because we had to kind of cast that wide net to let people know that it existed. And then we wanted to make sure that we weren't communicating so broadly that people didn't feel like this was for them. Would you say that that's fair, Patty?
Absolutely. And especially with it being a delivery system and something new to me, e-visits. I mean, I still that's why I said, okay, Susan, you explain them. But I think that the hard part about it, wrapping your head around an e-visit for me was that we've been doing e-visits in audiology, just like there have been e-visits that have been occurring in medicine for years, but it wasn't something that was wrapped up and ready to be billable, or it wasn't designed that way. We were used to, I was giving the example of when I first started working at the practice that I'm at now. That was the day where physicians ended the day at 5:30, 6 o'clock, and then they called patients back on the phone till 7. Which that doesn't happen anymore in the world that I see. I mean, it's very, very rare. So what that e-visit to me really brought back was that ability for us as providers, physician or audiologists, to ask our patients some very thoughtful questions and let them engage. And that's what we've not been able. So the e-visit really is that the patient engages. You ask them a question, they tell you if they need help, and that's that difference in them reaching out to you in an e-visit versus us reaching out to them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, they're initiating the visit. And the first one that we did, we said, okay, who could need our help when they can't get into the practice? That first big group, I think, went out to your active hearing aid wearers. Correct. And I can't remember how many emails we sent out, but within under a week, we had 146 responses where patients literally clicked and said, yes, I'd like to initiate a visit with my provider. I have something that is happening that I need help with, or that they would literally have come into the office for. But what was so surprising to us was the 146 that got laid up, we could see how many people started the e-visit, and we had over 700 start. And I think we sent out somewhere around like 1,200 or 1,400 emails or text messages. And you have to know how people want to be communicated with in order to do this. And so to have over 50% of them actually begin, and then so we knew who that was, and Patty started going through, and it was somewhere over 60% of the people that didn't finish the e-visit had called and scheduled some type of an appointment with the practice for something. So imagine reaching out to 1,400 people and having 700 of them have a real reason that they need you, but they didn't initiate that visit. So one of our big myths that we had always believed is that patients call when they need us is 100% not true. And so we both were kind of surprised. We're like, okay, that they want to know that we're following their care, engaging, and that if we have something that we can do to help serve them, that we're available. And we really got that message. I think that was a big message from your initial interview that you sent out.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you a little bit more as we get toward the end about some of those 700 people that we reached out to and what we found out from the information of those people that started but never completed the visit. Once we started the e-visits, we had to think about the interview, and you've heard Susan say interview. That's really questions that you ask the patient, thought-provoking questions based off of your target audience. that helps them are you okay? Are you, and where they could respond, a way that they could say, I'm good. Thank you for reaching out, or I need supplies or batteries, or something is not working. If I could list out all the responses that we got back, it was mind blowing. The responses that we got back in that first interview, some of them didn't even have anything to do with the interview question. It was that the patient had that secure, came to their phone, came to their email way to reach us. And I had audiologists, I was trying to explain to them what I was doing, and they were like, I don't understand why you're doing this. Our patients call if they want us. And I wanted to say, yeah, you would, we all thought so, but that's not true. And it really is not true. This engagement platform was really beneficial for the patient, and then allowed us to see it real time, and to be able to act quickly on it. And I think in practice, if we all think about it, as you're building your practice or you go to a physician and things, that initial contact with the gatekeepers of the practice, the people that answer the phone and those sort of things, sometimes can falter and not allow a patient to get to the care that they need. And I think the patient's ability to actually reach us directly was huge. Whoops, I think
Very good.
Okay. So if you look at how it impacted. Sorry.
I was trying to fix it at the same time you were, and it got stuck. Go.
It's okay. So we talked about how, even though we really couldn't bill for it, this was something I really wanted to try to align kind of under the CMS guidelines, so that we would have something to springboard off of as we move forward in the future with billing and for remote care in audiology. When I talk about the impact of e-visits, I really can't say enough about e-visits, because it gave the patient an avenue of which to communicate. And it really did show that we could define and redefine our patient types and be very laser-like in the way that we reached out to the different patient segments, and allowing them to reach back to us based and compared to database marketing, that a lot of times we stay very general. We don't want to seem salesy, even though we know it's something that the patient can really benefit from. So this was really a ability for us to reach out with something to ask, are you having a problem? And then when they say yes, they are, we then can come back with a solution for them, but they've initiated it.
Yep. And I think what you found with each of these new kind of delivery channels is you had to be very thoughtful in your intent in regards to how you communicate with your patients. Because we were really trying to be very laser focused and take care of the patients that we know we have a relationship with. I don't know how many times I probably have said that to Patty in the last 8 weeks. She's like, hey, how about if we do this? And I'm like, well, is that really more database marketing? Where you're trying to maybe let the world know there's a new accessory out, or there's a new product out? Or is this really taking care of the patient that you have? Like, if you're the patient and you get that, does it speak to you and your care, or does it just feel like something that you get in the mail? Because we never want to use an e-visit, as a true marketing channel. Although all communication and everything that we do with any of our patients is part of marketing, right? Because there's only of the 7 P's, only one of them is promotion, that hardcore advertising. Everything else, it really develops your brand. It's about culture, and it's about how you take care of your existing patients. I think also one of the things that was a big challenge for you with e-visits, because you have 18 or 22 audiology assistants within the entire business, you wanted to really use that and coordinate that care. So you were using your providers for the things that they can do and only do, and that you were really using the rest of your staff appropriately, right? Heightening productivity, particularly in a time where people's hours were cut.
Right.
So that was, I think, one of your bigger challenges. And I think that your team really stepped up.
They did. I think that one thing that was very unique, our audiology assistant placements and activity is in our larger offices. A lot of smaller offices don't have active audiology assistants. So what was nice about being able to use this platform is I was able to take and assign 2 audiology assistants that worked remotely from home and handled patients for people, whether they were in Panama City, whether they were in, Tampa. It did not matter because they had engaged with the practice, and a lot of that care would not have been given because a lot of those providers were not in the office because of different situations in the area that they were. So it allowed us to reach out across all of our different locations and provide care that we really could not have done before.
And to give people an example, I mean, across the board, and we can use hearing aids because it's something that's easy, we all, I think, can relate to, but the things that were coming in from each of these patient-initiated engagements where I, as a patient, am sending you very personal medical information, right? Protected information where I wouldn't want just anybody reading it. I don't want this to get into my provider. Some of them were just simply like, hey, I'm out of batteries and I can't go out and get them. Could you mail them to me? Mm-hmm. And that in any case, even if we were being paid by Medicare to manage it, would not be a billable engagement because there isn't a medical decision being made, right? It's a patient just kind of requesting something, and the audiology assistants did a nice job at kind of peeling those off and taking care of those. So then the audiologist could take over and say, okay, this patient has this going on, and they could either respond or they could set up a phone consult and be like, all right, Mrs. Jones, let's go back through your programs because we do have a television program set up in your hearing aid, but I just want to make sure that because it's only been a couple months, that you know how to access it. What really surprised Patty and I think, were the patients that that responded saying they're struggling with their current hearing aids. They can't hear certain things that they feel are really important, especially during this time, and they would like to begin the process to get new hearing aids.
And you can't come out of your house.
Yeah, and I mean, but what a revelation to realize that, they would have sat there and struggled for how much longer until you provided a channel for them to be able to access and have an intimate conversation with their provider versus having to call, leave a weird message with the front desk, not know if it gets through, leaving a voicemail and getting a phone call at 7:00 at night back as you guys are all working your caseloads. So it really was a unique experience to see the type of care and the different channels that you would be able to utilize to really have them feel satisfied.
Well, and the one thing I would just add to that, as we go to the next slide, where Susan was talking about how many times she had to say, now, is that really marketing, or is that, so we did do a couple of what would be considered more of a marketing piece, I guess. But it was really, and we did it via like an email blast. And what is really interesting is we had some people respond back to the email blast. We had more people respond back to the S-Engage about the email blast than ever responded back via and referencing the email blast. So that spoke to me again about how easy it was, whether it was because it could be on their phone or things like that. So we really were able to look at financial outcomes and that are continuing to change because I can't update them on a regular basis. But we were able within the first week to collect about $18,000 through remote service channels that would have been lost revenue because we could not have seen the patients. And what we also have been tracking is how many appointments came out of that. Because remember, in this format, where I'm in a medical environment, where I am also able to look at the patient's chart, rule out that audiology can help them, and then direct them back to whether it be their ENT or any other physician. And so I think from that standpoint, we really have been looking. I know it's more than that now, but the last number count we had that we are working on about 256 appointments that we made off of those initial e-visit contacts. So I can tell you right now, I know that we have sold about $40,000 worth of hearing aids just in a remote format. And it was really those people that needed help. We weren't looking to try to sell hearing aids remotely. We were really looking to try to help our patients. And so I believe that as we really look at it, I'm showing a $75,000 revenue generation, but I know that when we can go back and really track that revenue, it's going to be much higher than that. So if we kind of talk about we've talked about patient-initiated e-visits, okay, we spent some time on that. And so I think the key that finally has sunk into my head about an e-visit is that a patient initiates it. And so instead of us making outbound calls to the patient, we're really giving them a format that they can have a voice and initiate their own visit. Of course, remote programming services, and then our curbside services that we are still currently providing.
Patty, you have about 15 minutes.
Okay, so I think we're all familiar with remote programming. What you may not have been familiar with or prepared for is, as you could see through the emails that we were getting, manufacturers were updating their programming capabilities and the remote accessibility and things in the middle of the pandemic, because again, they developed these opportunities for us years ago, but not a lot of people actually actively engaged with remote programming. So there were things that we needed that the software could not do. And so the manufacturers really stepped up in that. But we had to review what each manufacturer could do. We had to assess what patients were in what products and things of that sort from a remote programming standpoint, and communicate that to them in a way that we didn't promise something that we couldn't deliver, because this particular manufacturer we couldn't do that, and we might be able to do it with manufacturer B. And then we really worked on developing resources that the providers could access. And when I say providers, I would even say our audiology assistants and things of that sort could access quickly. And those were videos and printable materials and things that manufacturers had actually laid out for us, as well as some of the ones that we developed ourselves. And then we had to really outline a protocol for how we were going to follow up those appointments with counseling and education material, because the key to any kind of care, of course, is consistency when it comes to a patient, and continually keeping them engaged so that we can continue to hear what they're struggling with and help them.
Patty, one of the quick questions that somebody had asked is, how did you handle payment for the visit? Did they pay ahead of time? Did they pay after the visit, et cetera?
Great question. So the two audiology assistants, we have a payment portal on our website. So when they would reach back out to the patient after they had reviewed their interview in S-Engage, if the patient needed something that money was going to need to change hands, they would take payment on the phone and go ahead and process it for the patient, so that the patient didn't even have to go into the portal. So if they wanted supplies, we told them what the cost would be. We went ahead and included the shipping cost, and then processed it right that time.
Perfect. Thank you.
I think that in looking at remote programming and some of the key learnings, obviously, is that it expanded our ability to not only communicate with our patient and things of that sort, but it also expanded the way that we could deliver. Right, not just one of my favorite, and I think one of our patients' favorite now, is curbside. If we had not had remote programming capabilities, we'd be much more limited in what we could do in some of the curbside visits. We also found that coordination between those providers is extremely important in our environment, because our ENT practice is multi-specialty. And so, of course, we may have been asking about something to do with their hearing, which they may have had a problem with, but we also got things about that they were having, all these other issues going on, and that they were really trying to get in touch with their doctor. So we were able to help direct them back toward that. We really looked at, marketing in a very, very different way. I think, we've done database marketing for a long time, always more on educational format. But I think in this case, we really tried very to be very succinct in what we were offering. And like Susan said, we didn't want it to be salesy. That was not the purpose. It was there to be something that would be a benefit. And then of course the safety protocol adjustment primarily for the remote programming was the fact that if you were already equipped, you would just go right into remote programming. What we found, as I would say most people in the US have probably done, how many of you in your practice activate remote care services at the time of your fitting? We had not. Even though it's something I had put in a protocol, staff had not been doing it because of time, because of a variety of reasons. So that was something that we had to deal with. And, you just can't do everything at one time. There's a lot of, especially if you are dealing with every manufacturer in the world, you have to learn. Each one of them is very different. So we had to, get training ramped up and do it in such a way that staff could get there. We also learned patients don't really just reach out and tell you what they need to make things better. They tend to reach out when they are absolutely having a problem. But if they get the opportunity in a format to tell you that, I'm doing okay here, but if there's something that I could do better, if there's a way I could do better in this environment, I want to hear about that. And then, of course, we know that we will continue to to provide remote programming because our patients, many of them prefer it, and they have requested to continue in that format. From the outcome standpoint, I think outcomes can be looked at in a variety of ways, but we have developed charges associated with our hearing aid programming and follow-up, regardless of whether it's done in the office or not. And it made a simple transition to just take our fee schedule, the way that we had it, and charge as if the service was being provided in the office. And so I didn't really develop a new charge system. We just adapted the one that we had for the services that we were providing. We were able to deliver new hearing aids to patients without them having an in-office visit. And I can think of 5 off the top of my head. Those patients have thought that was the most incredible thing that could have ever occurred. And then I think we will always be looking at remote programming now as a channel that patients really should be offered. It will be one of our continual offerings. If you kind of go back and look at curbside services, this is where I said, if I was a good roller skater, that would have been fun. The biggest challenge in that is I really had to develop how are we going to deliver this care safely, meaning to the provider, because I already had mentioned our providers were already anxious in some ways of being in the office and seeing patients. And how are we going to deliver that curbside? Because we know that we can't stay 6 feet away and toss hearing aids in the car window, correct? We had to find a way to get their technology that needed service or provide them something in a safe way. So we developed all of those sterilization protocols and things of that sort. And we really utilized, the technology capability matrix to determine how we were going to coordinate a particular appointment, because some appointments were required that the patient had to bring their devices in. And so how are we going to handle that and get them back to them? And then we also had to really determine where we're going to see them. I mean, most medical offices don't have curbside parking spots. We do now, but we did not then. And we really will. We're opening a new office. I've already ordered the signs for curbside. And so we will continue to provide curbside. I think that, if you look at the challenge to curbside is like, okay, they pull up in a car. How are you going to know they're there? How is the provider going to know that they're providing it curbside? And we mentioned how we did that with appointment types, but we also had to know, how are we going to know that the patient's here? They're not coming into the office. So we had dedicated lines that the patient could call to let us know that they were in the parking lot. When they made the appointments, after we made our initial contact and that we realized that they needed to come in for an in-person appointment, curbside or into the office. If it's curbside, we had to put what model car they were in. Because we could have 3 or 4 different patients arriving at the same time. And, obviously we wanted to be at the right time. Yeah. And the other thing too is, I really utilize Facebook in that format. And one thing I did, I don't know how many of y'all have done this, but I'm not a big Facebook expert for sure, but I did a Facebook Live and I boosted it. And when I boosted it, but the last time I think I looked at it, and boosting costs like $10 on Facebook, just so you know. And I think I had, at the last time I looked, like 10,000 views to that live video. And then really looking at, again, how we were going to address those patients. We screened them when we made the appointment with the CDC questions about had they been around anyone with COVID, had they been out of the country. So we followed the same format curbside that we did when the patient came in the office. We took their temperature. We did make sure that all staff went out with all PPE, and that we disinfected things for the patient in front of them so that they knew that they were safe. We also realized in delivering this care that we were able to actually save time between appointments for many patients because they didn't have to transfer in and out of the car, and they didn't have to sit down in the waiting room and fill out paperwork and then get back up. We had done all of that work first. So we found that we were able to actually put more patients in the schedule in the day than we could in our other format of face-to-face, because
that is another point actually with the e-visits. You can set up pre-visit interviews. And so if you have patients coming in where they're going to need paperwork or to re-sign, compliance or whatever it is, you can actually send that out to a special link to that patient ahead of time and have all of that work done prior, which was another nice kind of hands-off, contactless engagement. And we're about 5 minutes, Patty.
Right. And then, of course, too, patients, the comments we got back on some of the interviews was, we are so thankful that to know that y'all are okay. They were glad that we had reached out so that they knew that we were okay, but they also were so grateful that we had thought of them in this time and that we had put the thought into how are we going to reach our patients. And I think that the biggest thing that we've really discovered is that we were able to deliver new hearing aids. Patients were losing their hearing aids, still are today, by losing them in their mask when they took them off, a variety of things, extending warranties, really taking care of things that we would have normally done. And of course now, and this is different all over the country, but Florida, in the way that we had been reopening, we had never been closed. We'd been reduced, but we never closed. And then how are we going to ramp back up? What did we have to do, and what were we going to actually provide in this time frame? So I think it really did help us redefine patient access and what some of our options were. And so I think that's something that really has to be looked at when you are trying to promote social distancing and avoiding risk. You have to rely on more of a virtual format of visit. How else are you going to provide a contactless service and manage their health care? And then we really had to look at what regulatory agencies and insurance providers have supported by adopting and allowing, both in medicine and in, in some cases, in some of the audiology areas, to be able to provide and bill for those services, and really look at what's going to happen as we move forward in these areas. And how does that help us to provide in remote areas? We have offices where patients drive an hour. Should we really have them driving to the office? So I think, we have to really consider that one day, COVID is going to be over. And I know it doesn't seem like it, but, it is going to be over. And we're not going to be in a global healthcare crisis. But will we find that our way that we practice has permanently changed? And I believe that, I think we will. I think we're going to see that we really need to be preparing for a way of delivering services that will be billable in the future. I think that we can do that. And also adding that value, even if it's not billable insurance. Keep in mind that we are so accustomed to not charging for our services because they're bundled in hearing aids and things of that sort, that services that we provide are billable, whether they're covered by insurance or not. And then you have to really think about, is this a way that I can use to be competitive to provide care in the community and to deliver care to my patients. And, you know, we just really appreciate the opportunity to speak on this. I'm going to let Susan tell you just a little bit about our ebook.
Oh, and just a couple quick things. There were a couple comments, one about CIs, another asking how you were dispensing products without having a patient come into the office. And so I couldn't see who that was because it just said guest. So if you'll just shoot me an email, it's susan@openoceangroup.com. If we missed you and it didn't say our name or your name, we will absolutely send out the information. The ebook is coming back, I think, on Monday. So if you all want to just shoot me a note, I will absolutely deliver it to each of you, to your inboxes, with the information from the slides, in addition to some of the process piece, kind of the big points that Patty worked that might help you implement some of this in your own practices at different levels. And we really appreciate the time and effort. And I kind of feel like this was just as quick as it took us, kind of what our last 2 months have felt like, Patty. And it's good to see so many people that we know on, you know, it's nice to see everybody. Hi, Noelle and Joanne and Barry and the crew. It's
I can't even see who's there. I'm so technology challenged. I do want to answer one question. I've got 19 seconds.
Yeah.
You said